What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And today, I want to talk about the Temur Breach deck because it put on an absolute clinic during this regional championship season, becoming one of 3 modern decks in the format and really just being at the very top of the metagame, the apex predator, and just absolutely mowing through the metagame no matter what anybody threw at it. Players just found a way to keep winning, and winning. And just in the United States alone, between the regional championship in Portland, the regional championship in Charlotte, 16 spots, in total, those top 8s, 9 of those were Temur Breach decks. Temur Breach also had 3 of 4 spots in the finals, securing those players an invite to the World Championship and many other to the Pro Tour Final Fantasy that is going to be taking place later this year. And of course, that we're going to be covering some of the things you need to know, because I believe that one is going to be modern, which would make sense considering that you had to play modern to qualify for this, to qualify for that. So we'll be covering that as well. So if you want to see any sort of coverage from future Pro Tours, World Championships, regional championships, anything like that, please consider subscribing to the channel, ring notification bell, all that fun stuff. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you want to go even further, leave a like on the video if you learned anything or if you were entertained. And of course, check out the description down below for a few different links. I have a link to my Twitch channel. Go ahead and follow me over on Twitch so you know when I go live. I'm going to try to go live at least 1 to 2 days a week, playing a lot of the modern format and getting into standard, of course, as we start gearing up for the modern regional championship qualifiers and preparing for the standard regional championship. So we're pretty well informed of what's going on in the format there. Of course, you can go ahead and follow the other link to the Casual Spikes YouTube channel, where me and my co-host Randy over at MTG with Randy talk a lot about what's going on in the competitive formats of Magic, and also preparing you for your regional championship qualifiers and getting you that invite to the regional championship, and hopefully putting you on the fast track to the Pro Tour. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service where you can rent cards for Magic the Gathering online and play in various different events to try and maybe even get qualifications for the Pro Tour, or just win prizes and just kind of get better at Magic the Gathering, because that's really what we're all trying to do. And they make it very easy, considering that you're able to play a variety of different decks based on your rental limit, and help you with play testing and things like that. So definitely check out the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. If you use my code in the description down below, you will get 5% off your monthly subscription. I'd like to thank Manatraders for sponsoring the video. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the Temur Breach deck, and we have a few different benchmarks we're going to be looking at to kind of figure out why this deck was very powerful, why it ended up, being probably one of the best choices of a deck that you could pick up, play, learn, etc. for this regional championship season, and some other comparisons that we can draw to other very powerful decks that have existed in the modern format to kind of explain why the tear that this deck went on. So let's go ahead and take a look at Jesse Robkin's list from the regional championship Charlotte to get an idea of what is actually going on with this deck. So here we have the Grinding Breach deck, this one piloted by Jesse Robkin, who ended up winning the SCG Regional in Charlotte. And before we look at the cards and everything like that going on in the deck, I want to outline a few points that we're going to be looking at to kind of chop this up and explain why Breach is just this fantastic deck, and really how it's able to just dominate the modern format and how it's gotten better over time. So a few key things that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at, essentially the combo that it's trying to enact. So how powerful is the thing that it's doing? Is it going to win the game on the spot? Is it going to win the game over multiple turns? What does it kind of look like? What's the setup? The next thing we're going to look at is the consistency of it. How easy is it to set up the combo? Whether, we're playing with 2 or 3 cards, we're trying to assemble a board, whatever the case may be. How consistently are we able to kind of do this, either through, the redundancy of the deck, or having other cards that maybe go and search for our combo pieces. The next thing we're going to look at is how fast the deck can assemble said combo. This is kind of important because in a format like Modern, with like efficiency and speed and everything, we see this from like the Storm deck that can win on like turn 2 over various different ways. It's just kind of an example. And lastly, what's kind of plan B and C look like for these kinds of decks? And when you're playing a combo deck, plan B and C is kind of important, because there are going to be players that are able to kind of mess with your main game plan, maybe not necessarily in game 1s, where if you're playing a deck like Grinding Breach, there's a good chance that players are playing some amount of hate towards your deck. So, plan B and plan Z or plan C, and kind of understanding what your role is at that time and how well it works. Because, if your plan B or your plan C is just as good as most of the deck's plan A's, that, when you go up to a deck that maybe has a better plan A than your plan B, you're still not a complete dog in the fight, or there's not a zero chance that you can win the game. So that's just kind of the things we're going to be looking at when we're kind of evaluating the breach deck, and in general how you should be evaluating decks in whatever format that you're playing if you're trying to decide on what deck to play. So the first thing we're going to start with is, what is the thing that the grinding breach deck is trying to do? So what the grinding breach deck is trying to do, if you are kind of new to this, or maybe you don't know exactly how the grinding breach deck works and how the combo works, things like that, we want a Mox Opal or a Mox Amber in play with one of our 8 legendary creatures in Tamiyo or Emery, Lurker of the Loch. This also works if Tamiyo is on her flip side, and if we have Jace Wielder Mysteries in play. It also works, you're just more restricted on the color of mana based on the thing that you actually have in play with Mox Amber, so you're better off having Mox Opal. So one of these 2 free artifacts that ends up tapping for a mana, Grinding Station, which is a 2-mana artifact that we can tap and sacrifice an artifact, and target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and whenever an artifact comes into play, you may untap Grinding Station. And then lastly, the half of the namesake of the deck in Underworld Breach, one of the most broken cards ever printed in Magic the Gathering history. So what happens is that you take one of your Moxen, and you tap it for our mana. Again, Mox Opal, the ideal one, just because you can tap to add any color. We do have some green cards in here that we'll kind of get to here in a minute. But you tap Mox Opal for mana. You then use Grinding Station to sacrifice said Mox Opal or Mox Amber, and then you target yourself to mill 3 cards. You mill your 3 cards, and then thanks to Underworld Breach, it gives all our non-land cards in our graveyard escape, and their escape cost is equal to the mana value plus exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. So we sacrifice the Grinding Breach, or use the Grinding Station to sacrifice the Mox Opal. After we float a mana, we mill ourselves for 3 cards. Now we can cast the Mox Opal from our graveyard, exiling the 3 cards that we milled with the Grinding Station. It's going to come into play. It's going to untap the Grinding Station. We're going to tap the Mox Opal for mana. We're going to sacrifice the Grinding Station, so on and so forth, until you add a bunch of mana to your mana pool. You cast a Jace Wielder of Mysteries, and then you plus it to target whoever. You have no cards. Who cares? You're going to draw a card, and thanks to its static ability, if you draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead of losing the game. So this is kind of the straightforward way. You would even see something like Thassa's Oracle here as well. Jace Wielder Mysteries being slightly better because of the fact that you can't stifle or counter the ability that allows you to win the game. With the Thassa's Oracle, you can counter that trigger and put yourself in kind of an awkward position where now you have to figure out a way to kill the Thassa's Oracle and then replay it from your graveyard. Jace Wielder Mysteries just kind of takes all the mystery, if you will, out of actually comboing. We also see Grape Shot here. You are adding to your storm count by casting Mox Opal over and over again. So this way, I believe if you have enough cards in your graveyard, once you get up to like 6 mana, so you end up casting Mox Opal probably 6 times, you're going to end up having an additional Storm for Underworld Breach. You're going to be able to kill your opponent from essentially a full life total, of 20. So, it's not necessarily that hard, and I think for the time being, that Grape Shot, Jace Wielder Mysteries are also going to be the go-to win conditions for this deck. So just to keep in mind, and we're going to call this a 3-card combo because obviously with milling and everything like that and being able to essentially generate as much mana as you're going to need, you don't necessarily need Jace Wielder Mysteries or Grape Shot in your hand. As long as they're in the deck and you have enough cards in your graveyard to where you're not necessarily exiling either one of these to cast Mox Opal, you're going to be in good shape. You're going to be able to cast it and everything like that. Everything's going to be kosher. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So how powerful is this combo? Well, it just straight up wins the game like 99% of the time. There's going to be times where opponents maybe play some kind of value turn with this. I don't think that that's super likely in this kind of climate. But that does happen. But a lot of the times, once you assemble these 3 cards in play, you are generally just going to win the game, unless you kind of play in a way where your opponent's going to be able to kind of snipe your graveyard and leave you with essentially nothing, and then you're going to have to sacrifice the Underworld Breach at the end of the turn and hope that you just have enough to kind of cobble together another win. So that is the thing that we're doing. I would say definitely very powerful when your 3-card combo will just kind of end the game. And on top of that too, it's cards that you generally want to be playing. There are a decent amount of artifacts in this deck, so Mox Opal is going to be able to add mana to kind of help us do some of our, pretty broken things a lot sooner than we should be able to. Grinding Station is arguably the worst card in the deck, but obviously it facilitates the combo and it's cheap, so it definitely gets kind of a it's a spot here. It does its thing. And Underworld Breach, as I said, this is probably one of the most broken cards printed ever. It's definitely up there in the echelons of broken cards printed in Magic. It was only a matter of time it was going to be broken in Modern. It took a lot longer than I think anybody probably thought, but here we are. And this is most likely, spoiler, most likely going to be the card that is banned towards the end of March here once we get into the Modern RCQ season. But there we have that. So I would say it's very powerful. I'd say it ranks pretty high on the power level scale. So next, let's look at the consistency of the deck. What things does it have going on to kind of improve the consistency? Well, starting with the creatures, we have Tamiyo and Emery. Tamiyo, it being a 1-mana legendary creature. When it attacks, you investigate, means you make a clue token, which is an artifact token that's going to sit on the battlefield. You can pay 2 mana, sacrifice to draw a card. The kind of important thing about this is that Tamiyo is an enabler for the really quick kills and just allows you to play a longer game as well. So Tamiyo getting to make clue tokens is obviously going to help you with getting up to Mox Opal if you don't necessarily have a lot of artifacts in your hand. And then there's just times where games are going to go a little bit longer in the mid to late game. You're going to be able to just crack a few clues, maybe draw some cards from your Mishra's Baubles, things like that. And Tamiyo is going to be able to flip, and then over the course of a few turns, you're going to get up to that ultimate, draw cards equal to half the number of cards in your library, and then giving you an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. You don't even necessarily need to play that either. You can go and plus, give your creatures -1, -0 until end of turn. Pretty good against the Boros energy decks that try to go wide with a bunch of 1-powered cats. But you can +1 or +2 this up to 4, and then minus down to 3 to return target instant sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And if it's a green card, you add 1 mana of any color. There's one really good green card in the deck that you can get with Tamiyo, Seasoned Scholar, and it just ends up kind of forwarding your game plan even farther, which we'll be getting into in this consistency part here. But Tamiyo kind of checks all the boxes. An early threat that is going to help you kind of get your artifact count up, and it's going to be a threat later on in the game. Emery, Lurker of the Lock, is probably the more explosive one, and I'm glad that this is just a literal potato image of Emery, Lurker of the Lock. This is a 3-mana 1/2, and it costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control, so you'd say it has affinity for artifacts. It is also a legendary creature, so it's going to allow your Mox Amber to tap for blue mana. When it enters the battlefield, you put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard, which is going to help us, again, just put raw cards into our graveyard while, essentially getting us set up for our breach turns where we're just going to have a ton of food in there for plenty of spells and not have to worry about, chaining through our whole deck and having to exile our win condition or potentially exile our win condition to do our thing. We're just going to have enough cards already. And then you can tap her to target an artifact card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. So this also has very good early game applications and good mid to late game applications. So Emery is going to mill us cards. So we're just going to, get 4 cards in our graveyard, meaning that if we mill a Mox, we have 3 other cards that when we play our Underworld Breach, we're going to be able to just continue to kind of go off with Breach and kind of do our thing, and again, having enough cards to exile, but also cast something from our graveyard. If the game goes relatively long, in the mid to late game, just like kind of Tamiyo, you're going to get a bunch of value from Emery, Lurker of the Lock. Things that players have been doing since Emery has been legal in the Modern format is doing things like, looping Mishra's Bauble, where essentially you're going to get to draw a card on your opponent's turn, then you're going to draw your card for turn, you play the Mishra's Bauble, so on and so forth, and kind of keep this thing going. There's also some pretty powerful cards that you can just kind of get back as well. We receive Soul Guide Lantern here, where you can just kind of pop your opponent's graveyard every single turn. You have either Spell Bomb, where you can sacrifice it to return a target creature to your hand. You can even sacrifice it by paying 1 mana to draw a card. So this is, again, just kind of a way that, if you need to draw a card immediately, and you have either Spell Bomb in your graveyard, you can go ahead and sacrifice it, so on. Draw a card, and then maybe recast it with Emery to leave up some kind of unsummon effect on someone's creature. So there's definitely a lot of things that you can do here with Emery. Again, just kind of looping to draw a bunch of cards is going to be fine. And of course, it casts 2 of the 3 things that we need to kind of go off. So also kind of a plus for it. because it's going to kind of help you be able to ramp and potentially enable some turn 2 kills when we get to that point. More consistency, we have Preordain, we have Malevolent Rumble being probably secretly one of the best commons from the Modern Horizons 3 set to see significant play in Modern. This sees play everywhere. We see it in like the Yawgmoth decks, we see it here in the Temur Breach decks, we see it in the like Eldrazi decks. It's just a really good card because it is going to allow you to get a permanent card from among 4 cards from the top of your library, put it to your hand, you put the rest in your graveyard, and it rebates you a mana back here by creating an 0-1 colorless Eldrazi spawn that has sacrifices to add a colorless mana. So essentially this gets to cost like 2 green up front, but you end up getting that colorless mana back. This means that you can kind of bank that mana for another turn, or if you just have enough mana to kind of go off, you can then like Malevolent Rumble, get that mana back, and then cast another 2 mana spell, something like Underworld Breach. And again, with enough cards in your graveyard, preferably between like Malevolent Rumble and maybe an Emery Lurker of the Lock, you're going to be able to cast 2 things from your graveyard while also having cards left over and be able to generate enough mana that you need to where you're going to be able to play one of your win conditions or cast whatever spells you need to kind of keep going. So definitely really sweet there. Malevolent Rumble is a pretty messed up Magic card, all things considered. So in terms of the consistency of the deck is wildly consistent. It has cards that kind of play to both the for early like turn 2, turn 3 kills, and we have cards that do play very nicely in kind of these mid to late games where we kind of want to extract as much value as we can out of our cards while also being able to play these cards pretty early on to again kind of enable these degenerate like turn 2 wins. So that kind of goes to the I would say the in general like power level and how this deck kind of assembles its things pretty consistently. Now, as far as the speed, again, I have alluded plenty of times that there's a bunch of turn 2 kills with this deck. I mean, you really only need 4 mana, or you just need to get a bunch of cards in the graveyard and cast an Underworld Breach, because just getting to loop Mox Opal is going to be huge, especially if you just have like 2 Moxes. You can tap 1 for mana and then cast the other one from your graveyard, Legend Rule, keep the untap 1, float mana, and then boom, you have enough mana for Grinding Station to where then you're going to be able to sacrifice another random artifact to then mill more cards, untaps itself, because for whatever reason it has to untap itself when it comes into play, just because how it's worded, and then cast another Mox Opal, and then just continue to kind of combo, do your thing until you win the game. So definitely, again, between like Malevolent Rumble being able to put cards into the graveyard and Emery Lurker of the Lock doing the same thing, it does a lot to kind of get enough cards in your graveyard and get enough things going to where you're going to be able to cast a lot of these things in the same turn. It's very easy to have 4 mana into play. Just from, say like a turn where we cast like Mox Amber, Mox Opal into like land Emery, we mill some cards, maybe we find like a Mishra's Bauble, whatever the case may be, and then we end up just being able to, or casting like another one of our 1 mana artifacts. Even casting like Preordain to try to find one of our free artifacts, put it into play, and then we have, access to Mox Opal mana. So right there, we end up having 3 mana going into our next turn, to where then we're going to be able to ideally play another land, play a Malevolent Rumble, get that mana back. We have 3 mana left. Then we're able to play like maybe another 1 mana spell just to put cards in the graveyard, maybe play another Emery, mill a bunch of cards, keep the non-summoning stick 1, play another one of our other milled artifacts, preferably maybe something like Mox Opal, that's going to give us another burst of mana, doing its best Lotus Petal impression, to then, play Grinding Station, play Underworld Breach, whatever the case may be, ideally Underworld Breach, and then just continue to kind of do our thing. So plenty of turn 2 and turn 3 kills, and the deck only gets more consistent kind of the later turns, but I think turn 2, turn 3, probably turn 3 is like really the sweet spot of this deck, but it definitely has a lot of draws that enable turn 2 kills, and something you need to be aware of that puts a lot of pressure on players, because I think if you don't kind of understand what is going on, I mean, you can understand seeing a lot of objects in play and knowing that like this is probably going to be pretty bad for me, but some players I don't think pick up on the fact that like, oh, I'm just dead this turn because of what's going on. So definitely to kind of check off those 3 things, the deck is very powerful when it gets its thing assembled and does it relatively consistently and can do it very quickly, which again causes a lot of problems for a lot of decks in the format if they're not able to kind of interact in a meaningful way, which is why we see like cards like Soul Guide Lantern seeing play in these decks, and something that we kind of seen over the course of the weekend at SCG Con Charlotte. Lastly, again, we talked about like plan B, plan C, and you could definitely get some hints of it as we kind of talked about it. Tamiyo, Emery, and then of course like Urza Saga, a card that we've neglected to mention this whole time here. These are all very good backup plans if we're not able to assemble Grinding Station, Underworld Breach, Mox Opal all at the same time. Urza Saga on Chapter 2 is going to be able to allow us to make constructs. We're going to be able to make 2 constructs before we have to go and search our library for an artifact. And of course, here we then have Needle, Soul Guide Lantern, Aether Spell Bomb, Mox Opal, Mox Amber, Mishra's Bauble, whatever the case may be. All these cards are going to help us to do something. We can do some tricks with like like Aether Spell Bomb, where we can like bounce our own Emery and then like replay it, mill more cards, whatever the case may be, and just kind of extract more value out of it, until maybe we can kind of set up for a turn where we can go for Underworld Breach, Grinding Station, and Mox Opal kind of combo. We talked about even Tamiyo, where if you manage to flip Tamiyo, this is going to end up being a super grindy planeswalker. You're going to be able to kind of neuter your opponent's creatures by giving them -1/-0 whenever they attack you or a planeswalker. Being able to buy back cards like Malevolent Rumble or Sink into Stupor, Swan Song, Preordained, whatever the case may be. You're going to end up extracting a lot of value from it. And of course, the best one being Malevolent Rumble, because you're not only going to get a mana back from the Tamiyo, but you're essentially going to get another mana back when you actually cast the Malevolent Rumble, essentially costing you 1 mana. So in a way, virtually free. Also, again, just being a planeswalker that's super annoying. -7, you end up just drawing a bunch of cards. Pretty good chance that you can just get very close to just naturally milling yourself out, which is like another secret mode of this deck, where you could just play like this game where we don't necessarily have Underworld Breach or anything like that, but maybe we have multiple Mox Opals and we're able to like add a mana with a Mox Opal or whatever the case may be, and then Grinding Station to sacrifice it and mill more cards, and then use Emery to cast the Mox Opal again, untap the Grinding Station, and we just mill ourselves for like 3 to 6 cards every single turn until we find Jace, and we're able to play Jace. Whatever the case may be, this deck does have backup plans upon backup plans on top of ways of just protecting its own combo, that it's just kind of a hard deck to... It's kind of a hard deck to keep up with, and there's a lot of things going on and a lot of moving parts that make this deck very difficult to play, even more difficult to play optimally, and even more difficult if you're kind of on the other side of it, because it's going to attack you from multiple different angles. And why I said it before when we kind of went over some of the preview videos. I think that white is a very good color for like the sideboard, and I thought that would mean that like Boros Energy would be in a pretty good spot. And Boros Energy got pretty close. I've even seen it beat Breach quite a few times, but just didn't have enough to hang because the deck plays through hate incredibly well. Yes, there's been some games where they play one piece of hate and the game is over. I've also seen Grinding Breach play against 2, 3, 4 pieces of hate and still come out and win the game, which is absolutely insane. There's really no deck that should be able to kind of do that sort of thing, which I guess is like another benchmark that we can kind of look at, as well as this deck does have just different ways of kind of getting out from underneath things like Collector Oof by playing Lightning Bolt, Swan Song, again, just another way to kind of protect its combo when it's going off. Sink into Stupor as well is pretty good, and then even in the sideboard as well, like Cosign to Memory, Nature's Claim, Strict Serenade, Swan Song, Unholy Heat, those sort of things going on there. So definitely a reason why this deck is the best deck and why I wanted to talk about it and why I was long-winded, and I am so glad that I ended up getting through that, because I definitely didn't think that I would have survived explaining all that, because my brain just works in mysterious ways, as some of you will find out as you are subscribed to the channel. But, that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope y'all kind of got a pretty good understanding of why this Grinding Breach deck is absolutely insane. There's no way that it is existing definitely at least in the way that we know it now, past the March 31st ban and restricted announcement. And of course, we're going to be going over some predictions and things like that of the list once we kind of get to that, week from the actual ban and restricted announcement. So if you want to hear my thoughts and opinions and kind of us evaluating the different metagames and the potential changes that have to take place, be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, all that fun stuff, as is a free, easy way to support me and my content. And go ahead and check out the links in the description down below. Check out the Casual Spikes podcast. Check out the Twitch channel, all that fun stuff. I do greatly appreciate any and all the support. That's going to be it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.